Clint Eastwood is up to something. At 93, you'd think he'd be slowing down, maybe finally stepping out of the spotlight. But that's not Clint. He's never done things the way people expect. And what he's working on now? It might just be the perfect full-circle moment in a life that started with rebellion, risk, and a relentless drive to carve his own path. Because before he became the legend, the gunslinger, the hard-edged detective, the grizzled old icon, he was just a kid from a family that never stayed in one place for long. A kid who didn't follow the rules, who barely scraped by in school, and who had no idea that his restless spirit would one day make him one of the most enduring figures in Hollywood. Humble beginnings and family background. Clint Eastwood entered the world on May 31, 1930, in San Francisco, California. And right from the start, he made an impression. Weighing in at a whopping 11 pounds at birth, the nurses gave him the nickname Samson, a fitting name for someone who would grow into one of Hollywood's toughest icons. His family wasn't poor, but they weren't settled either. His father, Clint Eastwood Sr., took whatever work he could find, moving the family constantly in search of better opportunities. From one town to the next, they packed up and started over, never staying in one place long enough for young Clint to feel at home. But in 1940, that changed. They landed in Piedmont, California, a wealthy suburban neighborhood where things finally seemed stable. And it wasn't the classic hard times, bootstraps upbringing you might expect from a future Hollywood tough guy. The Eastwoods had a swimming pool, country club access, and a comfortable life. But comfort didn't mean structure, and Clint wasn't the type to fall in line. Rebellious youth and early interests. School? That was never Clint's thing. He wasn't a star student actually, he was the complete opposite. He struggled academically, fell behind in classes, and even had to take summer school to catch up. But his biggest problem? Authority. At Piedmont High School, Clint wasn't known for good grades, he was known for pushing boundaries. He pulled pranks, stirred up trouble, and ultimately crossed the line too many times. The final straw? An obscene message sprawled across the school scoreboard and a flaming effigy left burning on the lawn. That got him expelled. With nowhere else to go, he landed at Oakland Technical High, where teachers tried to steer him toward acting. But Clint had no interest in standing on a stage. His mind was elsewhere, on cars, on music, on anything that let him work with his hands and call his own shots. He became obsessed with piano, spending so much time practicing that his fingers would bleed. He learned how to work on car engines, figuring out every piece under the hood. He even dabbled in aircraft maintenance. He wasn't following the traditional path, but he was learning skills that would shape him into the fiercely independent man he'd become. And while it might not have seemed like it at the time, that rebellious streak, that refusal to follow the script, it would one day be the very thing that made Clint Eastwood a legend. But what about now? Decades after rewriting the Hollywood rulebook, Clint's got one last trick up his sleeve. And if you think you've seen everything he has to offer, just wait, because what he's doing next might just be his most unexpected move yet. Most Hollywood legends have a story about their big break, some lucky moment that sent them rocketing toward fame. But Clint Eastwood? His road to stardom didn't just involve luck, it involved survival. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, before he became the man with no name or Dirty Harry, Clint found himself in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, fighting for his life. And if he hadn't made it out? Well, the Hollywood we know today would look very, very different. Near-death experience. It was September 30th, 1951. Clint Eastwood was 21 years old, serving in the U.S. Army as a swimming instructor at Fort Ord in California. A safe gig, right? No battlefield, no front lines, just training soldiers how to survive in the water. But fate had other plans. That day, Clint hitched a ride on a Navy bomber plane back to base from Seattle. It should have been a routine flight. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. First, the back door of the aircraft flew open mid-flight, forcing Clint and the pilot to make a desperate fix. Then, the radios and oxygen system failed. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, the fuel ran out. Lost in the fog, miles off the California coast, there was no choice but to ditch the plane into the freezing Pacific. As the aircraft hit the water, Clint and the pilot scrambled out and into the dark, choppy ocean. But surviving the crash was only the beginning. There were sharks in those waters. The cold was unbearable. And the shore? It was somewhere out there in the distance, but getting to it would mean pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. Clint swam through the night, battling exhaustion, hallucinations, and the unforgiving currents. Depending on who tells the story, he swam anywhere from 2 to 4 miles before finally stumbling onto land cold, disoriented, and lucky to be alive. Decades later, when Clint starred in Escape from Alcatraz, playing an inmate who swims across the San Francisco Bay to freedom, it felt real because for him it was. He'd done it before. He had lived it. And it wouldn't be the last time his real-life grit would make its way onto the big screen. Break into Hollywood. Surviving a plane crash would be enough of a life story for most people. But for Clint, it was just another chapter. The real fight was still ahead because surviving Hollywood? That would take a whole different kind of endurance. After his military service, Clint bounced from job to job. He worked as a logger in Oregon, a lifeguard, and even played ragtime piano in a bar just to make ends meet. Acting wasn't on his radar, at least, not until fate intervened. One night, Clint ended up at a party in Malibu. And among the Hollywood crowd, there was one person who changed everything: director Howard Hawks. Something about Clint, his look, his presence stood out. Hawks saw potential. And in Hollywood, potential was enough to open a door. Clint was encouraged to take acting classes, and soon he started landing auditions. But his early career was far from glamorous. His first roles were forgettable bit parts, and even when he landed a steady gig on Rawhide, the pressure of Hollywood hit hard. He suffered from anxiety attacks, questioning whether he was cut out for this life. Still, he refused to quit. And little by little, the small roles turned into bigger ones. The anxious young actor turned into a confident on-screen presence. And before long, the man who had survived the Pacific was about to take on an entirely different kind of challenge, becoming one of the biggest stars Hollywood had ever seen. But Clint's journey to the top wasn't smooth sailing. And just when he thought he had found his place, the industry and the audience would demand something entirely new from him. And once again, Clint would have to reinvent himself. Clint Eastwood had already made a name for himself, but Hollywood is unforgiving. One-hit wonders come and go, and even the biggest stars can fade into obscurity. The real test isn't just making it, it's staying on top. For Clint, that meant evolving, reinventing himself, stepping out of the saddle and into something new. And in the 1970s, that transformation would be brutal, violent, and believe it or not, a little bit ridiculous. But just as he was riding that unstoppable wave of success, tragedy struck. And for a moment, Clint Eastwood, the man who had survived a plane crash and fought his way through Hollywood, almost walked away from it all. Rise to stardom. By the 1970s, Clint had already conquered the Western genre. The Dollars trilogy, A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and The Good, The Bad, and the Ugly had turned him into a legend. But Westerns weren't enough anymore. Audiences wanted something different, and Clint was about to deliver. Enter Dirty Harry, 1971. This wasn't the silent, mysterious gunslinger of the Old West. This was Harry Callahan, a tough-as-nails San Francisco cop with a .44 Magnum and zero patience for criminals. The movie was raw, violent, and controversial. Critics called it fascist. Audiences? They couldn't get enough. Suddenly, Clint wasn't just a Western star, he was the face of a new kind of action hero. Gritty, unflinching, and always ready to ask, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" But Clint didn't stop there. He wasn't about to let Hollywood put him in a box. In 1978, he did something that shocked just about everyone. He starred in a comedy. And not just any comedy. A comedy where his co-star was a 165-pound orangutan named Clyde. Every which way. But Loose was goofy, bizarre, and completely different from anything Clint had ever done. And yet it became a massive hit. One of the biggest box office successes of his career. Westerns. Cop thrillers. Comedies. He could do it all. But just as Clint was proving he could survive in any genre, Hollywood threw him into a situation he wasn't prepared for, one that no amount of experience could have braced him for. Tragedy on set. In 1975, Clint took on The Eiger Sanction, a film that combined action, espionage, and high-stakes mountain climbing. It was ambitious, dangerous, and required real stunts, no green screens, no safety nets. Clint, known for doing many of his own stunts, was determined to make it as authentic as possible. The film crew traveled to the Swiss Alps, where real climbers and stunt professionals were brought in to capture the most daring scenes. Then the unthinkable happened. David Knowles, a stuntman working on the film, was caught in a rock slide and killed. It wasn't a scripted stunt gone wrong, it was nature, unpredictable and merciless. Clint was devastated. He had always taken risks, but this was different. A man had lost his life. The weight of that reality almost made him walk away from the film entirely. He questioned if it was worth it, if pushing the boundaries of filmmaking justified the dangers that came with it. But Clint had never been one to back down. He finished the film, but the experience changed him. From that moment on, he took an even greater role behind the camera, shaping not just his performances, but the entire way his films were made. And that shift from actor to filmmaker was about to take Clint Eastwood's career to an entirely new level. Because if he wanted full control of his legacy, there was only one thing left to do: start directing. Clint Eastwood had done it all: westerns, action thrillers, even a movie with an orangutan. But something was changing. The uncheckable tough guy was starting to show cracks. His characters weren't just strong, they were haunted. And the more complex his roles became, the more it seemed like Clint was drawing from something deeper, something real. Because behind the camera, his life was just as intense as the stories he was telling. Affairs, secret children, lawsuits, his personal life was a whirlwind of scandal. And yet, no matter what the tabloids threw at him, Clint Eastwood refused to slow down. But time? Time catches up with everyone. And after decades of defying the odds, fans started to wonder, was Clint Eastwood finally stepping away? Or was he planning one last surprise? Evolution of his roles. By the 1980s and 90s, Clint wasn't just making action-packed crowd pleasers. His characters were darker, more broken. They weren't just fighting enemies, they were fighting their own demons. Films like Pale Rider, 1985, and Heartbreak Ridge, 1986, still had the grit and intensity of his earlier work. But there was something different now. His heroes were older, world-weary, burdened by the weight of their past. And then came Unforgiven, 1992. This wasn't the gunslinger of his early career. This was William Money, an aging outlaw forced back into violence, haunted by the sins of his past. It was raw, emotional, and unlike any Western before it. It tore down the myth of the noble gunslinger, exposing the brutal reality behind the legends. After decades of playing the ultimate tough guy, Clint Eastwood had just rewritten the rules of the genre that made him famous. Scandalous personal life. But while Clint was crafting some of his best work on screen, his personal life was another story. Hollywood has seen its fair share of affairs and scandals, but Clint's love life was in a league of its own. He had multiple relationships, several children, some of whom weren't publicly acknowledged for years, in a legal battle that made headlines. His long-term relationship with actress Sandra Locke was one of the most talked about. They were together for over a decade, but when it ended, things got messy. Locke filed a lawsuit revealing the shocking details of their relationship, including allegations that Clint had secretly arranged for her to be locked out of Hollywood. Even as he maintained his image as the ultimate lone wolf, the reality was far more complicated. Clint wasn't just an enigma on screen, he was one in real life too. Later career and public concerns. Most actors slow down with age. Clint Eastwood? He did the opposite. His so-called grumpy old man era became one of the most iconic phases of his career. Films like Gran Torino 2008 and The Mule 2018 proved that even in his late 80s, Clint could still command the screen. But as the years passed, something changed. Clint, once a constant presence in Hollywood, started to fade from the public eye. He hadn't been seen at major events, and rumors about his health started to spread. Fans worried, was this finally the end of an era? Or was Clint Eastwood about to surprise everyone one last time? Later career and public concerns. As Clint Eastwood moved into his 70s and 80s, he wasn't slowing down, he was evolving into something even more compelling. Known for his tough guy persona, Clint leaned into the grumpy old man trope with films like Gran Torino 2008 and Cry Macho 2021. In these roles, he wasn't just the action hero anymore. He was a character wrestling with regret, loss, and redemption. The grizzled, no-nonsense man with a heart of gold had become a genre all on its own. But as Clint aged, so did the whispers. Where had he gone? Why was he absent from major public events? The rumors started flying. Was Clint Eastwood's health declining? Was he planning to retire for good? For someone who had lived a life larger than life, his sudden absence only made fans more anxious. Yet, as he's proven time and time again, Clint doesn't play by anyone else's rules. Still going strong at 93. At the age of 93, Clint Eastwood isn't just a figure of nostalgia, he's a living legend still pushing boundaries. Despite the speculations surrounding his health, Clint made a public appearance in 2022 at Jane Goodall's conservation event, easing concerns. There he was, smiling, chatting with the renowned environmentalist, looking every bit the icon he's always been despite the passage of time. But Clint's not just living in the past. He's still actively involved in Hollywood, directing and producing his latest project, Juror No. 2, a courtroom drama that shows he's as sharp as ever behind the camera. It's clear that Clint Eastwood has no intentions of fading away quietly. He's still part of the action. What's even more impressive? Clint credits his disciplined lifestyle, his low-fat, high-protein diet and fitness regimen for keeping him at the top of his game. And it's not just about Clint anymore. His son, Scott Eastwood, has openly said that his father was the one who inspired him to maintain a strict workout routine and eat with purpose. The Eastwood legacy of strength, both physical and mental, continues to live on. Clint Eastwood might be 93, but if you think he's slowing down, you're in for a surprise. This legend isn't done yet. Far from it. Clint Eastwood's journey from a rebellious youth to a Hollywood icon is nothing short of legendary. He's defied the odds, survived near-death experiences, faced personal turmoil, and reinvented himself time and time again, both on and off screen. Now, at 93, he shows no signs of slowing down. With his unyielding spirit, Clint proves that age is just a number, and his legacy continues to inspire. The man who defined tough guys in cinema is still making an impact, and it's clear Clint Eastwood isn't finished.